This is Criteria.
Everybody, welcome back to Criteria. I'm Thomas Meares, and I'm here with my co-host, James Vievsky. Hello, James.
Hey, Thomas. Getting the hair out of my face.
Okay. And we're here to veer off the Vatican film list, which we've been going through for the past 2 years now, to discuss a film by the Coen brothers, Joel and Ethan Coen. Now, we discussed a Coen brother film before on this podcast.
A single
now
brother.
That I think of it. Yes.
Yeah.
Was that Joel?
That's right.
Joel Coen's Macbeth. We were not particularly fans of that, but better when they're together, perhaps. So today we'll be discussing the 2016 film by the Coen brothers, Hail Caesar.
What kind of a meeting is this?
Well, it's not a meeting so much as a...
It's more of a study group.
And you're studying?
all sorts of jolly stuff.
History,
Economics.
same thing, isn't it? History, economics.
Don't you agree?
I'm not really a student of history.
Quiet angle.
So, thank you. Man is split.
Well, man's functions are split. There's the little guy, the regular Joe who works for a living. He's the body politic. Then there's the brain, the boss, the owner.
The boss is not the brain.
No, the boss is parasite.
Well, it's true that the boss doesn't work, but he has a function. He controls the means of...
Production, sure, but that's not a function. That's...
Parasitism. Shut up! On the body politics of the regular Joe. It's...
Man is unitary, a simple economic agent. Man's institutions are split, expressing contradictions that must be worked through. And they are worked through in a causative, predictable way. History is science. This is the essence of the dialectic.
You see, if you understand economics, you can actually write down what will happen in the future with as much confidence as you write down the history of the past, because it's science. It's not make-believe.
We don't believe in Santa Claus.
Another finger sandwich.
Oh, thank you. Now, if I follow this correctly... Who's that guy?
Mr. Smitrovich takes pictures for our newsletter.
Our understanding of the true workings of history give us access to the layers of power. Your studio, for instance, is a pure instrument of capitalism. As such, it expresses the contradictions of capitalism and can be enlisted to finance its own destruction.
Which is exciting. It can be made to help the little guy, the regular Joe.
The body politic.
Shut up.
Even though its purpose is to exploit the little guy.
On the body politic.
You're for the little guy.
For the little guy against, it doesn't matter. History will be what it'll be, and we already know what it'll be. But yes, we're for the little guy.
Aren't you?
Shut up.
Are you joking? Me? For the little guy? Of course I'm for the little guy. Is this guy a comedian? Listen, I've got to get back. The studio's got to be going nuts. Can we cut it off now and pick it up right here at the next study session?
Okay. Well, see... I'm afraid it's not that simple.
And so, Baird Whitlock found himself in the hands of communists.
I have a soft spot in my heart for this film for a number of reasons. It's got a Catholic element to it. It's one of their more warm-hearted films. And it's sort of their tribute to a number of different genres in the golden age of Hollywood. And it's their opportunity. There's a lot of little homages throughout their filmography to older films and older directors, but this one is where they're able to put it all out in the open. Right. And there's a lot of interesting references to be caught. So there's a lot to talk about. And today we're going to be talking with a guest that's never been on this show before, but I have spoken to him before on my other show, the Catholic Culture Podcast, the novelist and essayist Trevor Cribben Merrill. Trevor is the author of a new novel, Minor Indignities, out from Wise Blood Books, and also of an essay published in booklet form, also by Wise Blood, The Situation of the Catholic Novelist, both of which I spoke to him about a while back on the Catholic Culture Podcast, and I'll link to that episode in the show notes. Trevor, welcome to Criteria.
Thank you very much, Thomas. It's a pleasure to be here.
You suggested this film when I asked anything you'd like to discuss on Criteria, and it's a film that I figured we might end up discussing on the podcast at some point because it's got a Catholic element to it. It's a film that I have a bit of fondness for. And I'm just curious, though, why you selected this.
Well, it's one of the films that I've seen in the last 10 years, and I've seen fewer films in the last 10 years than I did in the decade before those 10 years because of the kids and the difficulty of sitting down to watch a film. But it's one of the films I've seen in the last 10 years that I most enjoyed. I think it's a delightful film. And its delight is really inseparable, I think, from that Catholic element you're discussing, because I think the two are intertwined. And so I think it's both an interesting example of a Catholic film made by filmmakers who aren't Catholic, and then it's a film that I was really eager to have the pleasure of rewatching. So this was a great excuse to do that. And it's also a film that has left me thinking about it a lot and wanting to talk about it. So this is a great opportunity to do that too.
Yeah, and another thing that I think makes this film appropriate to be discussed here on Criteria is that it is very much a movie lover's movie.
Right.
Right. There's a lot for a film buff to really delight in, and not just, some of these sequences like the musical number or the water ballet or the horseback riding and the lassoing, sort of technically delightful accomplishments in filmmaking, but also nods to film history and certain film archetypes. I found myself nostalgically sort of, wistfully remembering my time in Los Angeles and Hollywood and the theaters there and all of that. And so I think that having talked now on the podcast about films like Ben-Hur, about, the studio system, about these Preston Sturges comedies, it really feels like, okay, cool, now's a good time to talk about Hail Caesar.
Yeah, we mentioned Preston Sturges being a pretty significant influence on the Coen brothers. Right. This isn't, I mean, this is a comedy, but perhaps not one of their most Preston Sturges-y ones.
Right.
Oh, Brother, Where Art Thou is one that has an explicit reference to the Preston Sturges film Sullivan's Travels in its title. Another genre actually that we're going to be discussing soon, hopefully, that is a huge influence on the Coen brothers is noir. A number of their films they've made a number of noirs, outright noirs, right. Blood Simple, for example.
And even this film has some noir elements.
Sure.
Yeah.
And, but even many of their films that aren't on the surface noirs actually have noir plot elements. For example, The Big Lebowski is just saturated with noir plot elements.
It is a noir film.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, yeah.
So
it's rethemed.
So
but it is.
All the different things that they've done with genre. Of course, they've made a Western when they remade True Grit. And this film, which is set on the lot of the fictional Capitol Pictures, in an unspecified time, but during the golden age of Hollywood, 30s to 50s. I guess during Cold War, so probably after World War II.
Right.
Is chock full of references and displays of genres, not just any genres, but very specific genres that don't really exist anymore, but were typical of that time. Like, I've never seen a water ballet, but this was a really popular thing at one point, where you would have these highly choreographed, intense, bright Technicolor, ballets with lady swimmers in the water, and all sorts of crazy technical, crane shots and things. And, you know, the Western, a particular kind of Western. We get all these revisionist Westerns today, but that was a more simple and more straightforward kind of a Western that we see in this film. And then, of course, the sword and sandals Roman / biblical epic, the main reference point being Ben-Hur, but certainly many other movies of its kind that were probably a lot closer to being as cheesy as the one we see in this film than Ben-Hur, although that had its cheesy moments as well. The main character is Eddie Mannix, who is, what's his title? The head of physical production at Capitol Pictures, but the pithier way to put it is that he's a fixer. He gets in his hands in all kinds of business. He is fixing all sorts of emergencies that come up as all these different movies are being shot on the studio lots and on location. Anything from making quick decisions when there's bad weather on location in New Mexico, or when there's personal problem that the movie stars, one of them disappears, he goes out on a fling or on a bender, or there's something that needs to be covered up for the sake of the image of the star or the studio. So he's doing all sorts of things, and he's moving through all of these different sets, and that's why we get the opportunity to see all these different genres paid tribute to by the Coen brothers. But he's also a sincere Catholic, which is where this film begins.
Right.
We start out with a shot of a crucifix, actually.
Yeah.
And then he's in the confessional, and we get one of many somewhat comical confession scenes. What does he say? It's been a day since his last confession.
Yeah.
He's confessing that he snuck a cigarette when he told his wife he wouldn't. He told a fib to his wife about not having smoked, you know, things like that. And then, of course, what do we see him do but go tell a bunch of fibs under pressure, granted, to protect people's reputation, granted. But he does tell quite a few fibs in this movie, and he does smoke quite a few cigarettes. So we've got this guy who's a sincere Catholic, plainly trying to do better, but also under a tremendous amount of pressure, and in sort of an absurd situation where the value of what he's doing, which is getting, you know, movie stars out of their stupid problems, you know, is sometimes questionable even to him.
Right.
So, Trevor, you said that you thought the Catholic element of this film was inseparable from the enjoyment of it, and I presume you mean more than just those specific scenes, which are sort of explicitly Catholic in their subject matter.
Yes, there is a humorous treatment of the confessional, which I think is delightful. But I was thinking more about the way that art and spirituality are intertwined in the movie, and the way that Eddie Mannix, in striving to, I guess the term he uses is serve the picture, in other words, do all of the behind-the-scenes dirty work that's necessary for these films to get made, these films that give people a lot of happiness. As he's doing this, he's also, he spends really the whole film sort of thinking through his vocation and trying to discern the will of God. And so every one of these amusing scenes, whether it's the water ballet or the hopelessly miscast Hobie Doyle struggling to say his lines in the Comedy of Manners that he's been transferred into, every single one of these scenes sort of is like a moment, or even a sort of a projection of what's going on in Manix's mind as he tries to figure out, is this really what I should be doing? Or, and this is sort of another key plot point in addition to the kidnapping plot line, which I think maybe you already alluded to, in which the star of the sword and sandals epic is whisked away, and there's a ransom note and so forth. That's sort of the inciting incident. But the deeper question I think that the film's trying to answer is, as you were alluding to earlier, just now, Thomas, is what Manix is doing worthwhile, and should he take this job that he's been offered by a representative of the military-industrial complex, the Lockheed Corporation?
Right.
So there's a whole debate about whether art is valuable, and it's connected to the question of whether it's God's will for Manix to keep doing what he's doing.
Right. And Manix, who I meant to say before, is played by Josh Brolin. It's interesting that they chose a character who's not even an artist to be the protagonist in this question.
Right.
He's the person who might be portrayed as, a big bad boss in another movie, right?
Yeah.
Or somebody who doesn't really get it.
Yeah.
And we see a real pragmatism in his approach to artistic questions. Okay, it's raining down there. Let's change the title. Pitch that to the writers. But he's plainly someone who does see what he's doing as important. He does see the art as important, and he sees the at least in the way that the best of the golden age of Hollywood did. He sees the uplift of the American people as important, which is also, aside from financial and capitalist reasons, one of the reasons why he keeps having to run around making sure that his stars don't behave in a disreputable manner, at least for the public eye.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that he's a producer, and producers kind of straddle this divide between the business side of the entertainment industry and the artistic side, because he oftentimes is making decisions that have artistic implications.
Right.
And to be a successful producer at that level, you have to have an artistic knack, if not just straight up being an artist yourself. But he you can see that he possesses that quality or that sympathy in several instances where he's having to deal with artists. Like when the director comes barging into his office saying that he can't work with this actor, the director being played by Ralph Fiennes, very humorously. So he encourages the director, in the direction of what ultimately is a successful casting choice. Like we see a shot of the dailies from that day, and having been dealt a really difficult hand in casting this sort of low level Western actor in this
drawing room drama.
Yeah. The solution, actually, it ends up working out, or at least it seems to. And so I think that it's an interesting choice to have the producer be the protagonist here, because this other plot arc, this other subplot that we're following has to do with communist infiltration in the industry, and there's this sort of, this bemoaning the studio system. And this is from the mouths of these communist writers, who are upset that they haven't gotten seen the profits of their work. They're disgruntled, and there's a couched in that is a criticism of the industry, of the film industry, of Hollywood at that time, of Josh Brolin's character, of Eddie Mannix himself and what he represents, So I think that it's interesting because the Coen brothers are able to kind of have their cake and eat it too. They're able to kind of cover both sides of this question.
But ultimately, our sympathies lie, I think, with Josh Brolin's character. And it's interesting because, again, in another movie, you might be... The way people talk about the golden age of Hollywood today, of course, it's respected, but, the censorship is frowned upon. The control of the stars' private lives is frowned upon. What people in the form that people might call it hypocrisy, which is something that we can discuss whether it actually is that as displayed in this movie or not. And the blacklisting, the treatment of communism. And yes, he's able to poke fun on both sides. The Coen brothers are able to poke fun at both sides. I guess, one advantage to having the protagonist be a producer is that you can see all these different parts of the film business that you couldn't if the main character was an actor, or even if the main character was a writer. Maybe only a producer or a director would be going on so many different sets, at this time, and talking to people at every level of the industry, so that you wouldn't get the kind of I mean, we're dealing with all these other characters who have a very myopic view and a narrow view that that actually concerns their own interests.
Right.
And yes, Eddie Mannix, I mean, the charge made by the communists is that the communist screenwriters is that the producers are just serving the interests of the capitalist fat cats.
Right.
It's not even about the artistic value or the spiritual dimension of the picture. Man is an economic agent acting in self-interest, etc. And, you've got these writers and they're looking out for their own concern. And you've got the actor, George Clooney, who's the star of this biblical epic, quasi-biblical epic, Hail Caesar, A Tale of the Christ, sharing a sharing a subtitle with Ben-Hur. And Clooney is sort of delightfully satirizing his own perception. George Clooney is perceived as a kind of liberal airhead movie star. And so in this movie, he's given a chance to sort of poke fun of that image that he has to part of the American public. But he is this very myopic character. He doesn't even seem to care that much about doing his job, the way he's just sort of lolling around, despite having been kidnapped, just lounging around this nice Malibu beach house. But Brolin, precisely because he works for he covers the organization as a whole, he does see the big picture. And that can be a disadvantage if you're someone who's concerned only about money or about the bottom line, but it's a great advantage to putting things in perspective and reconciling the artistic and the human elements.
Yeah,
right.
And that's why I think that ultimately he and the system that he represents are vindicated by the Coen brothers. Yeah, and that the criticism that's levied falls flat ultimately.
Yeah.
Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, well, I was just going to say that, picking up on something you said, James, about the fact that maybe you were both referring to this, the Manix is sort of, Manix is the representative of the studio system, and as the representative of Hollywood, the source of all of these pictures that are providing uplift and, yes, entertainment to the American people, is sort of, he's getting a critique of what he's doing from two sides, or at least those two sides are represented in the film. It's the communist conspirators on the one hand, who are dismissing Hollywood as just a for-profit business to benefit the bourgeoisie, but then it's also the representative of Lockheed, who repeatedly in his meetings with Manix tells him, this is a circus that you're involved in here. The film industry, well, yeah, maybe it may seem like an important job to you, but it's pretty frivolous. You're just making movies. We're making things that have to do with real life. And so there's that element of it. And I think it's just really interesting that the film sort of finds a way of, in a very non-didactic way, finding rejoinders to both of those positions.
Right.
Yeah. And then as far as the Mannix's role as a producer and the reason that was the role that the Coen brothers gave him, I guess, I mean, there are a couple of points. One would just be that it's like, this is a sort of an implicit statement about the way that behind the scenes collaboration is always necessary to create a beautiful work of art. And this kind of guy will never even make it into the credits. But if he wasn't there, we wouldn't have any of these beautiful movies. And then maybe the other point is, and this is a point that Joel and Ethan Coen have addressed in some of the interviews that they did about the movie, is that the film actually has a kind of theology to it. And that Skank, the head, who's never seen, right? He's just somebody who calls on the phone. He's the head of the studio, is like the father. And then Brolin's character, Manix, is like the son who's doing the dirty work. And so the fixer, the head of you've got the physical production. It's almost like a statement about the incarnation. I mean, this guy's he's in the thick of it, getting his hands dirty. Yeah. And so he really is, it's so appropriate that he would.
I often thought about that while I was watching the film, that he was kind of a kind of guardian angel and also, advocate and, shielding his talent from certain people that would prey upon them, and getting them out of sticky situations. And not hesitating, even correcting when necessary. It's kind of this incredible moment toward the end of the film where what's his name, Baird Whitlock, the character that's played by George Clooney, comes back kind of spouting this commie nonsense, and Eddie Mannix just gets up, crosses the room, and just like slaps him silly, just slaps some sense into him, and it's almost, I don't know, it's the kind of no nonsense tough love that you wish would be doled out to more of these Hollywood blowhards,
Right.
I think back to like when Ricky Gervais hosted the Golden Globes and just how sweet that was. I don't know if you recall this. Yeah. And there's something of that here. This sort of like, what are you talking about? Like, go be a movie star, make these incredible films, and like get back to work.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's gratifying for me to rewatch this film after the past 2 years of just watching so many movies, doing this podcast, and watching a lot of classic Hollywood and learning about how the studio system worked, and getting a lot more of the references than I would have gotten, when I first saw this film. I do feel like they really have a nicely nuanced portrayal of the good and bad aspects of the studio system. We can talk about the sort of the religious angle with the Legion of Decency and stuff. But one thing I'd like to raise, first of all, is, Baird Whitlock's own character. You mentioned shielding his stars. And one question that arises for the viewer is, how much is he really shielding his stars and how much is he just papering over problems? And I think that's probably a problem that he himself is aware of. I mean, we see him go, Scarlett Johansson is playing the star of this water ballet. And he goes and she's pregnant and she's not married. And he's trying to get her to marry someone because, and he says, these water pictures make a lot of money for the studio, and these aquatic pictures, and he talks about her image. People love you because they see you as innocent, and she's aware of that as well. So he's trying to get her to get married so that this won't be a public scandal. But it's never said for any other reason than that this is good for the studio.
Right.
And that's his job. And that's why it's his job. They didn't hire a priest to just sit around and babysit actors for their spiritual good. This is a producer. His job is to protect the film,
right,
and to protect the studio. So it's understandable. But I think that there is something that gets a little lost in that, even though he's clearly got a caring touch to how he talks to people. And I think there must be something in that bothers him as well.
Uh-huh.
And that may be part of why he's wondering, is this worth it? Because am I just, I forget how the Lockheed guy puts it, but am I just dealing with a lot of goofballs and nuts and not really accomplishing something substantive? And by the end of the film, he's sort of reaffirmed in that vocation. And he's got this scene you mentioned with Baird Whitlock. And he tells him, the picture has worth. You're going to do this because the picture has worth, and you have worth if you serve the picture. And it's also about the fact that he badmouthed the studio and he badmouthed Mr. Skank. But ultimately, it's about the fact that the picture has worth and you have worth if you serve the picture. So I think that in the end, the movie does not present us with a cynical view of Baird Whitlock's job, that ultimately it is in service of the picture.
Yeah.
And hopefully it's in service of the human beings who are making the picture by getting them to submit themselves to something bigger than themselves, at the very least.
Right. Yeah, and I think that there's something like fundamentally religious about that. There's like an analogy that can be drawn, that there's something, like very fatherly in that organization, even if it is something that's reducible to the bottom line or to what benefits the studio or what benefits the picture. I think that like that's the space that the Coen brothers want us to be thinking, these sort of this network of like messy relationships and coordinations and all of that, there's something divine about what the producer is doing there.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned fatherly. I mean, another part of this conflict that Manix is going through is, well, the movie begins. I can't even remember what time he's in the confessional. It's kind of implausible that there would be a priest there to hear his confession. I think it's the middle of the night, and then the next day it's like 3 a.m. or something. But he hasn't been home. He hasn't seen his kids. By the time he gets home, his kids are asleep. When he tells his wife about the job offer, she says, "Well, I do like the shorter hours. It sounds great." And so a question that I had was, well, is there a way in which maybe he really should take the Lockheed job, not because working for Lockheed is intrinsically better than working for Capitol Pictures, but just that he could spend more time at home with his kids? And is there a way in which the film is kind of focusing too much on career as the place where your vocation plays itself out, and not enough on family? And I thought there were some convincing ways to argue that actually that wasn't the case. I think the film goes to some pains to show that Manix is a good dad, even though he sometimes has to work late nights. But it sort of is an open question for me.
Yeah. Well, we don't know ultimately if this is a particularly crazy time, or if this is just how it is all the time. Presumably it's something that happens with enough frequency that his wife would be relieved if in that respect if he would take another job. But we don't know whether it's ultimately just untenable for him as a family man to keep doing this. And I don't know. I think the confessional scenes are important because we do see him sort of confessing some of the same things, but there is a desire to improve. We laugh when he slaps Baird Whitlock, but then he goes and confesses that he struck a movie star in anger, and he's genuinely sorrowful about that. And so he's trying to do this job, but even in doing the job and getting the job done, he recognizes that there's ways he can do it better. And I think that probably applies to the way it interacts with his family life as well.
Right. In the very first confessional scene, it's not just that he lied, but it's that he lied to his wife, and that's really what he's confessing. And in the one scene that we get between him and his wife, he's, nothing but grateful to her and gracious about, that scene could have played out in so many different ways, and it often does in other movies, where the absent father is, kind of at odds with his wife and they're bickering,
or he's not really present.
Right. But there's actually like a real sense of them being on the same page, even though he has to be outlaid and working odd hours.
Yeah.
So she even explicitly says at one point, well, you know best. Yeah, and I just thought, well,
that is such an interesting line, because it seems at once to express a sort of, I don't know, I hesitate to use the word patriarchal, but it's sort of a way of husbands and wives relating to each other that is less familiar to the average Hollywood moviegoer today than it would have been in the 1950s. But I think I don't think that that's really what it's really expressing. I think I would side with you, James, in thinking that it actually just shows that there's a real harmony between husband and wife there, and that she does have a sense of her role as a spouse, and that when she says "you would know best," she means, well, you do the job. You're the one who works there. You would know best. So it's both. I think there's a harmony. There's a sort of a cultural environment that seems to foster that harmony between husband and wife, in the sense that they both have they're in their own lanes, and then at the same time there seems to be a genuine intimacy and understanding between the two of them. Yeah. Well.
There's a real harmony between this film and one that came out several years later, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. because not only do both, I don't know if you've seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Trevor, but not only do both concern themselves with this, golden age of American filmmaking, and feature all these sort of homages and little nods to different genre takes and stuff, but also there you scratch at the surface and there is this I don't know how else to put it except like a nostalgia for a way that things were done before. And that is maybe a little more prominent in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but nevertheless is still present here in Hail Caesar. I wonder how much the Coen brothers are interested in that, and kind of it's a different business now, just as like the family is almost a different business now. Do you get where I'm going with this?
Mm-hmm.
So James, what you're asking is, well, are the Coen brothers actually sort of deliberately fostering this sense of nostalgia, which I think you could arguably Quentin Tarantino is doing that in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Definitely. I think it's much clearer. Quentin Tarantino's point of view is a lot clearer in Once Upon a Time, whereas I don't know here with the Coen brothers.
I mean, it's interesting
because if so, it's a bit controversial, right? I mean, Quentin Tarantino caught a lot of flack for that film, but I don't think the Coen brothers received quite the same.
No.
Yeah.
No. I mean, this film is there's just a lot less. I mean, there's a lot less for people to get mad about.
But also, it was 2015, and 2015 was a different time than 2000.
Strangely enough, that's actually true.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. There's also a kind of fixer character played by Brad Pitt, but he's more marginal to the film, and he's also more of a solitary romantic than Manix, who is much more, I think, incarnate and sort of embedded in the world, and more.
But they're also
and more has more dimension as a character.
He's a stunt guy,
right. But they also both have to do with these these masculine roles,
and they're both dealing with in the one case, Eddie Mannix has many people he's responsible for, and in the case of the driver played by Brad Pitt,
that's right, the driver,
just one person, but they're both dealing with stars who occasionally act like babies,
right,
and who are myopic and insecure, and the Brad Pitt character could have easily appeared, in this. Sorry, not the Brad Pitt, the Leo DiCaprio character. Could have appeared in a scene in this film,
right?
In one of the scenes where he's, crying because his career seems to be going nowhere or something like that. Yeah. No, it would be interesting to compare these two. And we haven't discussed Once Upon a Time in Hollywood on this podcast. Maybe we will at some point. I wonder what you guys thought of the scene where all the different representations of different representatives of different religious groups come to the studio to talk about Hail Caesar with Eddie Mannix, to make sure that no reasonable American can be offended by this film's portrayal of the Christ. So we've got a Catholic priest and a Protestant padre, as Manix refers to him. We've got a rabbi, and we've got an Eastern, I guess an Orthodox bishop or priest or something there as well, and they end up sort of squabbling over theological differences in a comical manner. The theology of this film, perhaps, in the scene that is not the best explained that it could have been by the priest, about God the Son and God the Father,
right?
And so God is split, yes and no. There's division and unity, and unity.
Oh, gee.
And I'm not sure exactly who the Coen brothers are sympathizing with. They're Jewish, and the rabbi is clearly the outsider in the scene. Yeah, they're and again, his Mannix's point of view is really practical. he's interested in doing something that's classy and reverent, and reverent basically means classy in the golden age of Hollywood. That's often what it's sort of reduced to. It's classy. It's not going to offend anybody.
Yeah.
Tasteful, tasteful and
Yeah.
classy. Yeah. That's how the priest describes it. But I don't know what if you think that conversation has any implications for sort of the value of the picture that they're making. So much of the problems that he's dealing with seem to be more surface level. They're about making sure nobody is offended, making sure nobody's scandalized. They're not so much about the inner workings of the picture on a deep level or the deep theology of it. Now, maybe that's him knowing his place as somebody who's not an artist, right? It's like, I'm not qualified. He's very clear. I'm not qualified to debate theology. And he probably knows he's not qualified to debate, line readings either. But he's going to make sure that there's no, on the negative level, that there's nothing that's going to cause a problem in society. So maybe that's just more of that in that scene. But
yeah, what a great scene. I mean, very entertaining. I mean, just parenthetically, Thomas, you mentioned that the rabbi is sort of the odd man out. I think I think that's right. And it is interesting. There are a couple of moments in the film where I think maybe the Coen brothers, maybe Jewish sensibility sort of comes through. I was thinking of the moment when Manix is watching the dailies, and there's of Hail Caesar, and there's a black screen with the words "Divine Presence" to be filmed later on the screen. Right? Because you can't represent, right? You can't represent that. It did sort of seem to me like the Catholic priest gets the last word in that meeting, and
he says God is love.
Yeah, and he sort of any articulate. I mean, he doesn't literally get the last word. I think it's actually the rabbi who gets the last word.
Yeah.
But he gets the most airtime, and he articulates what is arguably not only the theology of Christianity, but also sort of some kind of a theological insight into the way the film is working too. So. But as to your question, I think maybe there's a larger question about whether, and maybe we could talk about the Hays Code and its effect on cinema. That may be something that you've addressed in past episodes of this podcast. But there's maybe a larger question about whether there isn't actually sort of a harmony or synergy between these efforts to make sure that the picture is classy and inoffensive, and the efforts to give it, to make it good. And I think there are a lot of persuasive arguments to suggest that something like the Hays Code was tremendously helpful in improving the quality of Hollywood films, and that at a minimum, there's nothing contradictory, or there's no sort of very difficult tension between the effort to make a film that isn't going to offend the Catholic priest or the rabbi, and a film that actually is a good film.
Yeah, I'm hoping to do an episode exploring that question of censorship in the golden age of Hollywood at some point. I would just have to do a lot of research, which is why I haven't suggested it yet. But there's also, you mentioned divine presence to be shot. There's also the scene at the when he's watching some other dailies, some more dailies from Hail Caesar, and it's the scene where the Roman tribune character played by George Clooney is encountering Christ, who we never see. This is obviously a reference to Ben-Hur. We never actually see his face. We see him from behind, and then we see Clooney's reaction to the visage of Christ, and we hear that the director, the scene director off camera say, Squint against the grandeur. It's blinding. Which James was like cracking up.
Yeah, that's a wonderful
It's
line.
just definitely one of the best
Yeah,
lines.
that's a great line.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was just saying that there's no tension between sort of making sure the film has a sanitized public image and the quality of the film. Well, it's pretty clear that Hail Caesar is not a great film. I mean, it's certainly achieving a certain class and probably also quite a bit of reverence. It doesn't seem to be an artistic masterpiece, but while George Clooney is making that climactic speech at the foot of the cross, everybody in the studio is moved by it. And it's pretty interesting. I mean, there's sort of an implicit statement there
touching,
about the effect that a film like that can have.
And then we're brought right back down to earth again with George Clooney forgetting the end of the line. It's faith. That's what he lacks, and that's the word that he forgets.
Yeah.
Then taking God's name in vain.
Yeah, yeah, right. But I guess
and it's reminding us that these are actors and they have no clue.
Yeah, but I guess that also connects to kind of what I was talking about earlier in like what is it that the Coen brothers are pining after or remembering, and I wonder if there isn't this sort of grieving a certain loss of faith in filmmaking, in like what it is that they do in Hollywood. I think that, I mean, maybe it's too early to talk about that in 2015. 2015, for our listeners who don't remember, that's before Trump was elected, and so there was really a different climate. I mean, things were beginning to heat up, but like,
2016 actually.
2016 was when he was.
The film came out.
But nonetheless, before Trump's election, I believe in February 2016. Yeah. I watched it on a plane, actually. So I remember.
Yeah. So, I think that you look at Hollywood now, and it's like, whether it's the Academy Awards requiring certain diversity quotas in order to be considered for an award, or the kinds of films that are going to be made. You hear stories from screenwriters all the time about the kinds of things that you have to make sure you get put into your script if it's going to get a read, or the animosity or the antagonism between producers and actors, the lawsuits, and another thing that I don't think had quite happened in 2016 yet was the whole Harvey Weinstein thing, coming home to roost. And, I wonder if there isn't a kind of, commentary here about a loss of faith in the project of the movies, the silver screen and what it is that they're all doing together,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we have that Lockheed executive saying, "Hey, where's your business going?" Of course, it's funny in retrospect because there's plenty more juice in Hollywood, since then. But he's saying, are people really going to keep going to the movies when everybody has televisions? But and certainly fewer people did in actuality, but people kept going. But now we have so many more things that people want to do instead of going to the movies. And now we have a real problem where theaters are shutting down, and there's really a lot less of that now. So
right.
it was timely in that respect as well.
And a big thing I think that's accelerating that process is that Hollywood is kind of like got its head in the clouds, that there doesn't seem to be as much of a emphasis on or a desire to make movies that are going to be entertaining for the American public, the body politic, but instead increasingly a kind of like solipsistic, navel-gazing, insular perspective that, increasingly is like, the Hollywood elite making movies for the Hollywood elite.
The scene that you were laughing most at, James, as we watched this, and I was looking at James at the beginning of the movie, and he said, "Don't look at me," because it makes me feel pressured to like react in some way instead of just focusing on the film. So I tried not to. I do have a bad habit of like, if I've seen him film before, just like taking a peek at the people who are watching it with me. But anyway, you were cracking up at the scene, which is one of the most memorable scenes in the film, certainly, where Hobie Doyle, the Western star, first goes to Mr. Lawrence Lorenz's, parlor drama and is just putting his foot in his mouth. And I'm just curious if there was anything that stuck out to you because you're an actor, that was very true to life, or.
Yeah, I don't know. That's I was cracking up because it was really funny. And part of what made it so funny is Ralph Fiennes just being such an incredible actor. I've seen him, in so many different roles. And the best actors really can do both, like the intensely dramatic and the like just slap happy comedic. And I was just getting such a kick out of that scene. But yeah, I guess it does smack of the truth, and that it speaks to something that's unique about film, as opposed to say theater, is that filmmaking, it seems to me, really is the director's medium, that really is the filmmaker's medium as opposed to the actor. Whereas I think that theater is much more the domain of the actor. Mm-hmm. You have producers, you have directors in theater, but at the end of the day, the audience shows up, the director may not even be there, and it's just an audience and the actors, and the show is theirs. But you go on set, and as an actor, you're really just another instrument for the director to manipulate. And I mean that in a very value neutral sort of way. I mean, handle and manipulate the way that a musician would manipulate the keys on a piano or something. It's that a director needs to know how to work with actors and how to get from them the kind of performance that's needed. And usually when you resort to a line read, you've failed. Say it the way that I say it is kind of like the last ditch effort to try to get something out of someone. And so yeah, that was all very funny. But it was also really, really funny to hear Ralph Fiennes, in his best classically trained sense stress appreciation for the language, say that line, "Would that it were so simple," trippingly on the tongue. There was a real dexterity and sophistication in the way that he was saying that line, and then hearing Herbie Doyle just completely butcher it. It was very funny.
Yeah, it's interesting that Herbie Doyle is the other character with whom we end up sympathizing the most. And he also is an outsider in a certain way. I mean, obviously in that scene, he's a huge outsider.
Yeah.
But honestly, he and Eddie Mannix, I think it's arguable that Herbie Doyle isn't an artist either. He's a showman. He has dexterity. He has a good heart. He can ride a horse, but he's not there because he's able to act.
Right. Right.
And that's why he is so out of place in that film. But it's interesting that these are the characters that the Coens put us with.
Uh-huh.
They also put us with the kidnapped George Clooney, but I don't know that we're really. I think we're sort of looking at him and laughing at him.
Yeah.
And that's true of Hobie at first, but eventually we get into his shoes. And so these Jewish writer directors have picked, a Catholic producer and a sort of non-actor movie star as the place of our sympathy, which I think is interesting. I mean, there's plenty of Jewish producers in Hollywood history. They could have chosen a Jewish producer, but that's not the story that they wanted to tell.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It's this is a film about Hollywood. It's nostalgia, but the people we're sympathizing with are not a producer is an insider, but he's not insider in the sense of the art of filmmaking necessarily. Always, anyway.
Yeah, Hobie Doyle is an entertainer more than an artist, I guess. He can sing, and he can do rope tricks, and he can do stunts. But there's a wonderful scene when he goes with that Carmen Miranda star Carlotta Valdez, I think her name is in the film, to the premiere of his latest Western. And there are a couple of shots of reaction shots of the audience, most of them older men and women in formal evening attire, just cracking up after one of the characters in the film has done something ludicrous. And you can see Hobie Doyle sort of taking it all in. He's in the midst of this laughing crowd, and it's, I guess, what I took away from that was just something about how this movie, which maybe isn't terribly good, and maybe Hobie Doyle really isn't an artist, but it's bringing this audience so much pleasure. They're just really enjoying it, and maybe that's one of the things that the Coen brothers are trying to get across in this film. Getting back to what you were asking about, James, what are they yearning for? Maybe it's that sense that you could make a movie that would just be sheerly delightful. And that's sort of what they try to do in this film too. There's not the slightest suspicion of a political subtext or
It's balm.
What?
Our narrator, this film has a narrator, calls it balm.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
When that scene is being
introduced. Yeah. And there's of course there's also an element of like sort of an attempt to woo back the TV audience, and so maybe that is also plays into this whole attempt to create a balm or sort of entertaining uplift. But it seems to be an ideal that. Boy, I could really get behind the idea that more people would try to make movies like this one that seek to capture or recapture that sensibility.
Yeah. And we see that scene, the similar scene in Sullivan's Travels, which we discussed recently on the podcast, when he's in the chain gang and they go to see the movie. And it's not a particularly good cartoon, but it's, they're all cracking up. And then also, in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, from the actor's perspective, we have the scene where Sharon Tate goes to see her own movie and is sort of delighting in the reaction of the audience.
Yeah. Wonderful scene.
Yeah. It's interesting the way that this film deals with the communists. We already mentioned sort of a little bit about their take on the capitalist studio system, but it's also interesting the way that this film, it makes fun of them, but it does make fun of sort of the idea that these communists were that powerful, in Hollywood, because it overplays it.
A submarine comes.
Submarine coming out of the water at Malibu, and the guy getting on it and leaving to go become Soviet man in a film for Mosfilm, I think is the idea. That's hilarious, and it's kind of poking fun at the whole idea while still not siding with the communists exactly. Still poking fun at the Red Scare a little bit there. And then, they're bragging about, we're all writers and we've been putting communist messages into films. But in reality, from my understanding, the communist screenwriters were really not putting any substantially communist messages.
Right.
It might have been a line here and there, but it was really often stuff like, a crooked politician gets overthrown but it's not specifically communist. It's just vaguely sort of pro-democracy stuff.
There's like a nod to that in this film where he says, you remember when the aldermen rise up and overthrow and elect a new mayor? And he says, I like to think I changed a few minds.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really not that substantial. My understanding is that their influence was more in donating money to communist organization. That's really, it was more that Hollywood money was being given to communist causes than anything else in the actual films. So the film, it's really pretty even-handed in the way that it deals with these things.
I think so. Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that makes it interesting. It's pretty broad in a way. I mean, the Coen brothers have a sort of childish aspect in a lot of their comedies that can be sometimes hit or miss. There's a slapstick element, but in this movie you have those broad jokes to some extent, but then also the way that it deals with the actual ideas is pretty deft and nuanced.
Yeah. So Thomas, you mentioned that you weren't sure that this was a top tier Coen brothers film. I have to
Well, I said that in our introduction that got interrupted, and it wasn't actually.
So that'll be lost to posterity, except in the trace that I just gave it.
Yes,
but I'm wondering where the two of you would place this in the Coen brothers' body of work. I mean, I'd sort of given up on the Coen brothers, I have to admit. I loved Fargo and Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And then I think I watched Intolerable Cruelty and Burn After Reading, and I just wasn't as impressed with those films, though maybe if I revisited them today, I'd change my mind. And so I had to be persuaded to watch this movie, and then was just completely blown away by how charming and wonderful it was. I think for many people, this film is sort of either people really love it or they don't like it at all. And I'm wondering, where you would rank it, and then why is it that people have there's this very sort of divided opinion about the film?
Well, I think one reason some people don't like it is it just seems a little bit light to many people. I think that it seems like an indulgent nostalgia trip to some people who saw the film.
Yeah.
It's definitely not as tight, or as sort of like every moment just like charged as some of their best work, like a film like Fargo or something like that. If it's not one of their absolute best, it's not because of what it says so much as just the sort of like the density of it, compared to a Fargo or a No Country for Old Men or something like that. So my ranking, I haven't seen all. I've seen all their movies, but I haven't seen them all more than once. I think my ranking would be Fargo possibly at the top. I think that there are some films by them that I really enjoy, but have some moral problems with just like too much blasphemous language or something, like in The Big Lebowski, or even Burn After Reading, which otherwise I enjoyed quite a bit. No Country for Old Men. A Serious Man is one that might be worth discussing on this show. That's one of their other big theological films, more from the Jewish perspective. And I've seen that once. That would be up there for me. I'm trying to think what else. I think that Blood Simple, their first film, might not be as sort of uniquely Coen as some of the later ones, but I think that's one of my personal favorites. I don't know. I think they have something like 18 movies, and I can't think of them all off the top of my head. But definitely Fargo, A Serious Man, No Country for Old Men would be among the best, in my opinion. What about you, James?
Yeah, I'd probably also include Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Yeah,
and,
that was the first one that I ever saw.
Yeah. And then Raising Arizona, maybe.
Yeah, I haven't seen that for a while.
But yeah, a lot of these films I haven't seen in such a long time that it's almost hard to.
Miller's Crossing, I've only seen that once. That's one of their early noirs, and that one is very well regarded as among their best as well. And then their worst ones by repute, and also kind of by my agreement, I would say Intolerable Cruelty is way down, is one of the worst, and The Lady Killers. And those are probably their two worst films, in my opinion.
I think that there's a lot to like in The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. I thought that some of the vignettes were a lot stronger than others, but there's some cool stuff in there too.
Yeah. And my opinion of, I'm not as, sort of all out fanboy of the Coen brothers as I once was. I think that their worldview leaves something to be desired in their films. There's a certain nihilism that sometimes appears. I think that, again, this is one of their warmer films. They're one of their less nihilistic films.
Right.
And Fargo's
the best.
It may or may not be nihilistic. I mean, you could debate that, but it definitely has a warmth toward humanity more than you might think. I think, and I think it's got one of the great film protagonists in Marge Gunderson.
Fargo's got to be the best.
I think that if I had to pick, I would say Fargo is their best.
Yeah, I wonder whether some people were put off either by the overt Catholicism of this film, or possibly by its warmth, which is in contrast to many of the other films. Though I do think that maybe the contrast isn't as sharp as it might appear at first glance, as you've been saying. But yeah, sort of a mystery. I would go through some of the reviews on IMDb or elsewhere and see the user comments, and some people just couldn't believe that the Coen brothers had made this movie, and were alarmed to realize that it had some Catholicism in it.
Yeah, well, I think that warmth is just not part of the zeitgeist, especially looking back on on this period in American or in Hollywood history.
Yeah,
I think
true.
that a lot of people would accuse this of whitewashing and as you know, of constructing a fantasy, you know, and
also I think some people specifically didn't like that it made light of the Red Scare. That, you know, this is a subject that Hollywood treats very reverentially and with a very specific narrative.
Yeah,
you know, these days,
right.
you look movies like I haven't seen Trumbo, the Bryan Cranston's movie, but you know, there's a certain narrative of these writers were, you know, martyrs for, you know, conscience and stuff, and this film just totally makes fun of them and makes as though the whole thing didn't really matter.
Punctured.
You know,
yeah.
So I think that probably rubbed some people the wrong way as well.
That would make sense. I mean, so one of the things another thing that I, you know, just trying to think about this film from a kind of a more theological or Catholic angle, and I think that there's a limit maybe to how far you can take that, because I don't know how deeply the Coen brothers themselves are actually thinking this through. But I did find it striking that Cudahy, the Lockheed representative, I think they have 2 meetings in that Chinese restaurant, and in both cases, he offers him a cigarette. He offers Manix a cigarette, and there's sort of the sense
he's the devil.
What's that?
For sure.
Yeah, he's right. He's got to be. I mean, that's
and the Coens like to do that. I mean, most obviously in "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?"
Yeah.
They like to have a devil character in some of these films.
And I was wondering about his name. I haven't looked into this, but I was wondering if there was any significance to his name too. But certainly, it's very clear that when he shows that photo of Bikini Atoll being blown up, that's supposed to be kind of a chilling moment too. And Manix himself says, I think he doesn't he say the word Armageddon? He just says Armageddon.
He does.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And but that seems to go right over Cudahy's head. So yeah, he's a devil character. He's sort of you could say that it's on a shallow level. It's a critique of the military-industrial complex, but I think it seems to go much deeper than that. And yeah, still thinking about that relationship.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I didn't really think about that much either.
Yeah, this is a really fun movie. And I'm sure there's a lot of references that I'm still not getting. I mean, I think I read a comment online where somebody pointed out that even the name on they show a Communist Party membership card very briefly, and there was some name on there that was a real major figure in the American Communist Party or something. There's a lot of really specific stuff going on that I imagine the more you know about this era of Hollywood, the more you would appreciate. I do also just enjoy the different actors who show up in random roles.
Yeah,
you know, from who plays the sister, the journalist sister,
Tilda Swinton.
Tilda Swinton.
Yeah. And those are a reference to this famous rivalry between 2 Hollywood gossip columnists, Luella Parsons and Hedda Hopper, who they were not sisters in real life, but they were really vicious rivals. And there was a whole like Hearst connection and stuff, as I recall, and they were kind of scandal mongers there's just a lot of great references. You have Jonah Hill playing this shady sort of I'm bondedness character. A lot of like little throwaway roles of big actors, and Wayne Knight from Newman in Seinfeld, you know, playing one of the extras who kidnaps George Clooney. Another of my favorite lines in the film is when Alden Ehrenreich's character, Hobie Doyle, and Eddie Mannix are conferring about this kidnapping, and you know he has this theory about extras. You know, you never know what an extra's thinking when you look at them. That's a very funny sort of show business joke. Well, anything else we want to discuss about this, or should we wrap up?
Well, we could. I mean, I could keep talking about this all day, but I guess I wonder, how seriously do you take just the discernment at the center of the film, and the way that somehow Manix seems to feel that he's discerned the will of God at the end of the film, and that he wants to keep doing what he's doing, and he does this through the confessional. I mean, it's just very striking. It seems to me like one of the best Catholic films out there, but I don't think it's going to be on the Vatican film list anytime soon.
Yeah, because it's interesting in that last confessional scene, he after he says his confession, he asks the father, can I ask you a question? How does he put it? He's talking about something easy.
Yeah.
And not that it's a bad job, but is it wrong that it's easy?
Yeah.
And there's this other job that's hard. It's really hard.
But it seems right.
But like, right. It's there's something like really fundamental in that moral calculus,
Yeah. And I think what happens, because we don't see him saying, I'm going to do this job differently from now on. I'm going to do it better in a way that, serves my family better, or I'm going to be more genuinely concerned about the well-being of the actors. But I think that maybe in some ways this character lacks confidence in the way that he makes his confessions, in the sort of like self-flagellating way that he makes these frequent confessions in the beginning of the film and at the end. He's doing the same things over and over, peccadillos, we might call them, but he takes them seriously. And I think that this confidence in his vocation probably allows him to move forward with greater confidence in God's grace, helping him to do it well as well. I mean, we even get a sense that right after that final confession scene, he runs out. The priest isn't even done talking yet. He's like, I got it. Okay. And then we see him right back in the swing of things, but there seems to be like a relaxation and confidence with which he dispatches his business in that next scene.
Right.
Which I think it doesn't really make it explicit a lot about this discernment, but my sense is that it's going to help him. Just being confident that he's where God has put him and where God wants him to be is going to help him improve the way that he does it.
Yeah.
In a more sort of like confident manner.
Yeah.
Yes, there's some connection between that and the word that George Clooney's character can't remember. I mean, in the sense that it's sort of like the word the actor forgot becomes the cornerstone or something like that. But he's got a renewed sense of faith in maybe in himself too, really. Just there's a limit to that, but it does seem to be salutary.
Yep. Yeah, and for all we know, there were guys like this, in Hollywood. I mean, we know there were guys doing that job, but it's entirely possible that at that period in Hollywood there was a place for guys like that. There was plenty of corruption. There was plenty of this movie doesn't pull back on showing that the misbehavior of these artists. There's some innuendo here in the musical number, for example, but that there were guys in there who were genuinely trying to do things with a Catholic integrity, and not just the sort of priests and censors operating from just outside Hollywood, but also guys who were cooperating with them inside the system as well, with a good intent.
Right.
So yeah, it is very interesting for the Coen brothers to come out with this film that takes the perspective that they do. And maybe not the perspective you would have expected them in particular to take. I do kind of wonder, with all the other films that they've made, it couldn't be more different from Inside Llewyn Davis.
Right. Right.
I wonder what it is that brought this out of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. It put me in mind of that line from Flannery O'Connor in one of her essays. I'll probably get this a little wrong, but something like, to be a Catholic novelist, you don't have to be Catholic, or you don't have to be Christian. You don't even have to be Catholic, but you do have to be a novelist. And so these guys really became Catholic filmmakers, and they check the most important box.
Amen.
All right. Well, Trevor, thank you so much for coming on to discuss this film. I'm sure we'll have you on again sometime.
I'd be delighted to do it. It's a pleasure, and James, I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Anything else coming up for you, Trevor, that we should know about, or do you want to tell people about your more recent publications?
Well, let's see what's coming up. Well, I think I'm going to be doing something with the Collegium Institute about the George Bernanos's novel, The Diary of a Country Priest, and that should be in June. But I think there are a couple of other sort of moments in this ongoing seminar that probably start earlier. I'm sure there's information about this on the Collegium Institute's website.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I recommend people listen to my episode with you on the Catholic Culture podcast, where we discussed your novel Minor Indignities, and people can pick that up. It's an enjoyable book, and if you don't have a lot of time, it's also a pretty short book. So I would recommend that. One of my friends did pick that up after hearing our interview and really enjoyed it. So I'm confident that people would like that. All right. Thanks a lot, Trevor. Now we're going to do our little business about the fundraising campaign.
Yes, because by the time this episode comes out, I think we will be nearing the end of our big Easter fundraising campaign over at CatholicCulture.org. We have a $60,000 challenge grant that's at stake. We have to raise $60,000, and then we'll get that matched, or we'll just lose it all. And we really can't afford to do that. We operate on a pretty lean budget. CatholicCulture.org does a lot more than just produce these podcasts. We've got news, commentary, liturgical and spiritual resources. We have a library on there. And then, of course, we produce 4 different podcast shows, this being just one of them. So if you enjoy this show, if you're aware of how much people benefit from our other resources, head over to CatholicCulture.org/donate/audio